Are you moving overseas on an international assignment with your company and you're going to have a driver? And you're not quite sure what it means or what it's like to have a driver or what you should expect? Well, you're in the right place. Hi guys, welcome back to the channel. Today I'm going to be talking to you about what it's like to have a driver when you live overseas. And I understand it's not going to pertain to everyone that's moving abroad, but for those of you that are moving with your company and they're going to be providing you with a driver, I really think this video is going to be extremely helpful because when I moved overseas to Angola, I knew I was going to be having a driver, and honestly, I was pretty excited about it. I was pretty excited about being driven around all the time. But pretty quickly after I got to Angola, I realized that having a driver was going to be a little bit more complicated than what I thought it was going to be. So I really wanted to create this video to help those of you that are going to be having a driver for the first time kind of know what to expect before you move overseas. So let me tell you about our driving situations in both Angola and Argentina so you can kind of see where I'm coming from. In Angola, we were assigned 2 drivers and 1 vehicle. So we had a main driver and then we had a backup driver that worked for us 2 days a week. So the main driver could have 2 days off. And then in Argentina, we were not assigned a driver or a car, but we did get a car service. So we used Remis. And with Remis, we could basically call ahead. Usually they needed a 30-minute time window, and we could schedule a ride to anywhere we wanted in the city. And since I didn't have a specific driver or car assigned to me in Argentina, most of my examples are going to come from my time in Angola because I spent 3.5 years there, and that's where I had a driver for the entire time. I never drove on my own. So the first aspect I want to talk about when it comes to having a driver is that they're always with you. And this one definitely has some negatives. I personally am an introvert, so I like alone time to recharge. And I didn't realize before moving to Angola how much time I spent in the car kind of going to and from work and to and from other places, actually being alone and kind of recharging myself. So that was something that I definitely had to get used to. Another example is to just go running at a park. Of course, I'd have to take my driver to the park. And then many times he would just kind of sit there in the park car and wait for me. And so I always felt a little weird about that. And finally, after about a year of that, and I really just wanted to be alone, I had a little more confidence and I finally asked if they could actually leave while I did my exercising and come back in an hour. So I finally did find ways to actually be alone without my driver kind of being right there or watching over me. It was really important for me to find those ways to be alone and not feel like I was constantly being hovered over. While you do get used to having another person in the car, it still always just feels a little different. You're never actually alone. You're always wondering if your music selection, whether or not he likes it, if you're listening to a podcast, what does he think about the podcast? It's always just a little bit weird. I mean, you definitely get more used to it and you form a friendship, which I'll talk about a little bit later in this video. But the fact that your driver is always with you can sometimes have its negatives and can be a little much at times. But the flip side of your driver always being with you is that he is also there to kind of be your first barrier of safety. One aspect of having a driver that a lot of people don't think about is that they're actually there to help keep their expat a little bit safer. So while drivers are definitely not bodyguards by any means, they do play, I think, a really important role in making sure that the expats are always safe. For example, if I wanted to go to a specific market or a different neighborhood to shop in, or like a street market, and he thought it was unsafe, he would definitely say something to me. This happened a few times. I've heard of a new place that I wanted to go to, and he would suggest maybe going to a different location because he thought that that wasn't necessarily the safest for an expat to be. Another way that he kind of helped keep me safe was just always ensuring he dropped me off at the best access points for different stores. So normally he would get very close to the door and drop me off. That way I didn't have to walk very far and be too exposed. And I always knew that he was kind of watching my back whenever I got out of the car and would go into a store or a restaurant or someone else's house. I always knew that if somebody approached me or if somebody was coming up behind me, he would have definitely jumped out of his car to help me. I never felt unsafe when I lived in Luanda, but I always knew at the back of my mind that my driver was not very far away should I need his assistance for anything. Another awesome part about the drivers is that they can tend to help you navigate your life. And so when you move abroad, there's so many new things that you're not sure what to do. Something as simple as setting up a cell phone or how to get new credits on your cell phone. It's completely different than the US. You don't just, this might be a good YouTube video, but you don't just get data each month. It doesn't work like that, and they don't automatically bill you. When you run out, you have to physically go get a card. It's called credits. You have to upload the credits onto your phone by punching in a bunch of numbers, and then your phone has been recredited with data or minutes. And so I had no clue how to do any of that before I moved overseas. And that was one of the things that the driver would help me learn how to do. When we wanted to take our dogs from Luanda to Texas, we did that 2 times. And my driver was the one that really helped me figure out what the process was. So things like that were super helpful in having a driver when he would help me just kind of navigate everyday life. But I think on the flip side of all this is sometimes I felt like I had another person I had to keep busy. And I think that was hard. And sometimes finding things for him to do and feeling guilty about him just waiting in my driveway was something that I definitely had to deal with the entire 3.5 years. So that brings me to our next topic, which is feelings of guilt. So there's also the feelings of guilt that come along with having a driver. And it's kind of hard to explain until you've kind of gone through it yourself, but I just wanted to bring it up because I feel like it is definitely, for me, it was one of the hardest parts about having a driver. And I definitely think it's important to be aware of before you actually have your own driver. So I would feel guilty a lot of the time when it came to having a driver, all the time. So an example would be if we were planning on going to a late Saturday night dinner that maybe wasn't going to end until 9 or 10 p.m. and they had arrived at 4:30 in the morning to take us to work. Sometimes I would feel guilty about that. Not sometimes, like almost all the time. I know it was their job and I know it was a good job to have there in Luanda, but I just never felt okay with that. And something about it just made me feel bad. So the feelings of guilt of always having him waiting around for you, of always having to bring them in, even though you might not go someplace, those were definitely real feelings that I had for the entire 3 years. And along with those feelings of guilt was the scheduling. And you basically had to work out the schedule with your driver the day before. So before they left for the night, before they went home, they would ask you, what time do you want me to come in tomorrow? Especially if it was a weekend. If it was a weekday, it was usually the same time because we went to work the same time every day. But like on Friday night, they would say, what time do you want us there on Saturday? And we would have to give a time. And it always felt difficult for me because I didn't know if I would feel like going for a run in the morning or going to brunch or what I was going to feel like doing. So most of the time, you would get your driver there early enough to go on a run. So I don't know, let's just say 7:30 in the morning. But then maybe you wake up at 7 o'clock and you're just not feeling it and you go back to sleep. And then I would just, once again, the feelings of guilt, I would feel bad that we got our driver there so early just to sit in the car and wait for 3 to 4 hours for us to be ready to go somewhere. So the scheduling was something that I had to get used to as well. Also, before we moved overseas, I had my own car and Andrew had his own car. So we were used to having 2 vehicles. And I know this is first world problems. We had 2 cars before we moved overseas, and then we went down to one when we lived in Angola. So that scheduling was a little hard to get used to at the beginning, especially when he was working and I wasn't working. I always had to make sure that the driver that he left on the house on time to get to Andrew's job because it was in the city and we lived more in the suburb. He needed to get to Andrew's job in time, so I needed to make sure that he left at a certain time. So I had to adjust my schedule to make sure I did all the things I needed to do before that time. Just little things that you just don't think about when usually you're used to having your own vehicle and you don't have to worry about not only scheduling a driver, but you're also scheduling when you're going to be using the car. So, the good news on all of this is that I did hear from other expats that they got used to the feelings of guilt and kind of worked through them. So, personally, I struggled with it, I think, the entire time we lived there. But I think if I went back on another expat assignment that required to have a driver, I would be able to work through it a little bit more. It may have been that it was just my first assignment overseas and I just was not used to it. I think if I had a driver once more, I think it would be a little bit easier to kind of navigate those feelings of guilt and the scheduling issues. All right, guys, let's switch gears and talk about the awesome parts about having a driver, and that is the convenience of it. So, of course, I have to talk about the really good parts about having a driver. I cannot deny that there were times when it was so convenient to have a driver. So, for example, maybe you go out to dinner and you have a few extra drinks. You don't have to worry about having a designated driver because you always have a designated driver there every single day. Or maybe if you went to the beach and you have played out in the sun all day and you are exhausted, you don't have to worry about driving home. Your driver's gonna drive you home. So that 2 hours, you can just chill, maybe even take a nap. So things like that were super, super nice about having a driver. I also always enjoyed coming out of the supermarket and knowing my driver was gonna be right there. I feel like every time I went in the supermarket, he would probably do some circles and maybe jockey for the best parking spot because I swear every time I came out, he would literally be the first car I see, which was so nice. I didn't have to walk very far. I didn't have to juggle my groceries very far. He would also do just like awesome things that weren't in the job description at all, helping me with my groceries. So I would bring the cart out and he would help load them into the car and he would help me take them from the car into my kitchen. So little things like that were just so, so amazing. And I was so incredibly grateful for him for just making my life in Angola just that much easier. And I know this part may make us expats sound a little bit spoiled. And maybe we are, I don't know. But I do know that life living overseas, especially if you're in a place where they require to have a driver, is going to be challenging at times. So when you get these awesome parts, then you really have to savor and enjoy them. I also briefly want to touch on feelings of dependency. And again, this was something that I wasn't used to because in Houston, I had my own vehicle and I didn't have to rely on anyone else getting me where I needed to be at whatever time. So I feel like when you have been very independent your entire life, it definitely takes some adjusting and some getting used to when you are depending on this other person to get to your house on time or get through traffic the way you want them to so you can get to your work or your meeting or whatever you have on time. So it definitely took some adjusting and getting used to when it came to feeling dependent on someone else to do just everyday things. All right, guys, if you're still here, thank you for continuing to watch. And I am at my last thing that you should know about when it comes to having a driver, and that is family. And I will try really hard to get through this segment without crying. We'll see how that goes. And I wanted to talk about family because I feel like when you spend so much time with your driver for however many years you are living in your new country, your driver really becomes like your family. And I wasn't expecting this one when I moved overseas. No one prepared me for these feelings, but you really do form a special bond with your driver when you're with that person all the time for multiple years. And we got pretty close to all of our drivers, but one in particular we had for the entire 3.5 years we lived there. His name was Francisco, and we nicknamed him Fran. And honestly, I miss him dearly. This is a part where I'm going to try not to cry. I normally cannot talk about Francisco without crying because he was such an amazing human and he helped us through so many hard things in Angola, and I will always, always be grateful to him. Nobody really prepares you for the fact that you get super close to people when you're around them all the time, especially your drivers. Really, being in the car, you're in just a regular car, a small SUV, so the person is literally an arm's length in front of you every single day for the majority of the day. When you're driving, the traffic in Luanda is horrendous. So just going to someplace as simple as a supermarket can take longer. Going into work took an hour and back. So we were in the car a lot with our drivers, and you really start to form this intimate bond. I felt like I could ask him anything I wanted. If I was curious about the Angolan culture or the Angolan food or an issue that was going on, I could ask what his opinion was. He was so crucial to me understanding life in Angola, and he was so crucial to me kind of enjoying life, and he helped me really get through a lot of hard patches as well. So really, it's an interesting dynamic having a driver. Your company will drop you off in this foreign country and just give you this person that you're supposed to tell your every move to, you're supposed to schedule every day with, you're supposed to be in a car with them all the time, and you're learning the new culture, you're trying to learn how to work with this person, and slowly but surely you start to get more used to it and more comfortable, and then you start to form a bond, and then that bond turns into a friendship. And then one day your company comes to you and says, okay, it's time to leave. And you're just not prepared for having to say goodbye to people that have been so close and in your life for so long. Starting to cry. But that's what makes expat life. That's another one of the challenges. You know, you have to have the challenge of forming bonds and working with new people. And then when you start to enjoy it, sometimes it's time to go home and you have to say goodbye. So just remember, when you are living overseas and you have a driver, or just living overseas in general, maybe you just have a friend, you know, that will not be moving back with you, or, you know, they're from that country and they'll never be leaving. So I did do a video on how to say goodbye to your country, and I definitely think that is crucial, saying goodbye in the right way. But I'll never forget being at that airport on our last night in Luanda and just hugging Francisco. He will always forever have a special, special place in my heart. And if you do it right, having a driver will be an awesome thing. There will be challenges that you have to work through, and it will be frustrating at times and annoying at times, quite frankly, but overall, we had a really good experience with the driver. And I know that if you can get through the scheduling and the feelings of guilt and the feelings of dependence and that type of thing, that you too will have a good experience when you're with your driver when you live overseas. All right, guys, I know this video was a little bit longer, but I hope it was helpful for those of you that are going to be moving abroad with your company and you're going to be assigned a driver. I just really think this information is going to be super invaluable to you. So if you'll go below, hit that like button and subscribe. And next week, I'll be back with some more expat related content. Bye, guys.